In the year 632, when Prophet Muhammad was turning 62, he announced his intention to perform the Hajj. This was not just any pilgrimage, it was to be his first and final pilgrimage to Mecca. Over 100,000 Muslims gathered in Medina to join him on this sacred journey. After completing the farewell pilgrimage, he led his followers back to Medina. On March 16, 632, at a location roughly midway between Mecca and Medina, Muhammad halted the caravan for the noon prayer. As the prayer concluded, he delivered a significant announcement. Turning to his followers, he declared the importance of one of his most esteemed companions and family members, Ali ibn Abi Talib, his first cousin and son-in-law. In the heat of the day, in front of thousands of Muslims, Muhammad proclaimed, "He whose Mawla I am, Ali is his Mawla." About 3 months later, on June 8, 632, the Prophet Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, passed away. And that one short statement he made in the desert would soon become a tsunami dividing the Islamic world and sparking centuries of conflict. The root of the division lies in the interpretation of one single word, Mawla. It carries multiple meanings, ranging from master or leader to beloved or friend. Some understood it as a divine designation of Ali as Muhammad's successor, while others saw it as a simple expression of affection and respect. This divergence in understanding led to the emergence of two major branches of Islam, Shia and Sunni. The Shias, loyal to the lineage of Ali, believed in the divine right to rule through the Imams. The Sunnis, guided by the caliphs, embraced a relatively more democratic approach to leadership. Today, about 90% of the Muslims in the world are Sunni, while 10% are Shia. However, this wasn't always the case. After the Arab conquest in the 7th and 8th centuries, most of the ancient civilizations of the Middle East and North Africa were submerged and forgotten. They all gave way to the Arab world and were completely Islamized and Arabized. Their religions, languages, and cultural practices diminished over time. Today, if you travel to countries like Iraq, Syria, or Egypt, you will find very little trace of ancient Mesopotamian or Egyptian culture, except for those pyramids and some archaeological sites. But not Persia. Persians remained Persians. They were indeed Islamized, but not Arabized. Their language didn't disappear. Their traditions didn't go away. And that was because the Persian civilization, after being Islamized, re-emerged in a new form. Scholars often refer to this as the Persian Renaissance. This rebirth of the Persian civilization was so profound and powerful that some scholars argue Islam itself was Persianized. So much so that this Persian Islam can be seen as the second advent of Islam. Islam arrived in Persia at an opportune time. In the 7th century, the Persian Sasanian Empire was a society teetering on the brink. Decades of internal conflict, economic hardship, and oppressive rule had left the Persian people yearning for a change. In a sense, the Persians were in fact awaiting a religious deliverer. The timing was impeccable. A powerful message coupled with a dedicated army proved irresistible, and the Islamization of Persia began. Within 1 century, Persia was largely Islamic. Mosques sprung up across the land, and fasting and the Hajj became mandatory for the faithful. Arabic script quickly took root in Persia and replaced the Pahlavi alphabet. Within a few generations, the ancient Persian script was no longer understood, and the Persian past was forgotten. Persians wholeheartedly embraced Islam and devoted themselves to consolidating this fledgling Islamic culture. They were among the first collectors of the Hadith and the first commentators of the Quran, and were absolutely instrumental in forming the Islamic worldview. if things continued like this for just another century, there was a likelihood that Persia would be fully absorbed into the Arab world, losing its unique cultural identity just like what happened to Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. But this was not to be. That trajectory was disrupted, and it has something to do with the Arabs themselves. They messed up. You see, at the heart of Islam lies a profound belief. All Muslims are equal in the eyes of Allah. This fundamental principle is enshrined in the Holy Quran. In chapter 49 alone, you can find at least 5 verses on this. Let's actually hear one together.
إنما المؤمنون إخوة فأصلحوا بين أخويكم واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون.
It says here, the believers are but one brotherhood, so make peace between your brothers. And there are more. If 2 groups of believers fight each other, then make peace between them. O believers, do not let some men ridicule others, they may be better than them. Nor let some women ridicule other women, they may be better than them. Do not defame one another, nor call each other by offensive nicknames. There are so many more, you get the idea. Similar verses can be found in so many chapters of the Hadith and the Holy Quran. Yet, the Umayyad government was ignoring all this and didn't do a great job running the caliphate. Corruption and nepotism plagued the regime. The harsh persecution of Shia Muslims and the Prophet's family angered many. The hereditary caliphate was also undemocratic and alienated many Sunni Muslims. To make matters worse, the Umayyad government stood for Arab hegemony and treated the non-Arab Muslims, especially the Persians, as inferior citizens, which contradicted the Quran's message of equality. In 747, the Persians couldn't take it anymore. They rose against the Umayyads in the name of Islam and the family of the Prophet. This uprising successfully overthrew the Umayyads, paving the way for the establishment of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasids promised a more inclusive and just rule, giving the Persians more opportunities and autonomy. This led to the rise of several powerful Persian dynasties in the 9th and 10th centuries, such as the Safavids, Samanids, Buyids, and many more. So almost 2 centuries after the Arab conquest, the Persians finally regained the control of Persia, which marked the beginning of the Persian Renaissance. The Safavids were the first to promote the use of the new Persian language, but the true champions of the Persian Renaissance were the Samanids in Transoxiana. The Samanids were from Balkh in northern Afghanistan. Beginning with the 7th Abbasid Caliph, they were appointed as governors in Transoxiana. By securing the borders, keeping the trade routes open, ensuring caravan safety, and maintaining the confidence of the Abbasid caliphs, the Samanids succeeded in making their realm prosper. Among all the Samanid rulers, the most notable was Ismail Samani, a name you will hear and say endlessly in Tajikistan. He isn't just featured on the 100 Somni note. The entire currency of Tajikistan is named after him. That's the level of reverence we're talking about. After Ismail came to power, he consolidated control, defended his realm against the pagan Turks in the northeast, and helped the 16th Abbasid Caliph defeat the Safavids in the south. At its peak, the Samanid Empire encompassed large parts of the modern-day 7th Dynasty region, plus northeastern Iran. Though initially loyal to the Abbasid Caliphate, Ismail transformed the Samanid realm into a de facto independent state. Tajikistan takes immense pride in claiming him as their national hero, immortalizing him with monuments nationwide. But here's where the plot sickens. His glorious mausoleum, one of the oldest and best preserved examples of early Islamic architecture in Central Asia, with brickwork so intricate it almost resembles lace, is not in Tajikistan. You will find it in Bukhara, Uzbekistan. How did this happen, you ask? Well, that's a story for another episode. The Samanids oversaw the first Persian translation of the Quran, fully Islamized and Persianized Transoxiana, and earned credit for their fair treatment of subjects. Their administrative, fiscal, and juridical systems became a model for subsequent dynasties well into the 19th century. Their greatest contribution, however, was reviving the Persian culture. Under the Samanids, New Persian made its debut as a language of science and learning. It was created based on Pahlavi, Dari, and the Quranic vocabulary. Very quickly it became, after Arabic, the most important language within the Islamic world. Today, over 130 million people speak New Persian, including Iranians, Afghans, and Tajiks, and it is also understood by generations of Iraqis, Turkmens, Kuwaitis, Azerbaijanis, Pakistanis, and even some Muslims in Russia, India, and China. The Samanid courts in Bukhara and Samarkand became renowned centers of learning, attracting scholars, poets, scientists, and artists from across the Islamic world. Two of the greatest names in pre-modern science, Ibn Sina, the father of early modern medicine, and Al-Biruni, the father of comparative religion and modern geodesy, both lived in the Samanid Empire and exchanged many views. The pioneering mathematician Al-Khwarizmi lived during the early Samanid era. His treatise, Algebra, gave rise to the English word algebra, and his name, Al-Khwarizmi, has been immortalized in the term algorithm. Rudaki, the first major poet to write in New Persian, was a court poet under the Samanids. He is recognized as the founder of the New Persian poetry in Iran and as the father of Tajik literature in Tajikistan. Ferdowsi, the author of the greatest Persian epic, Shahnameh, was also born and raised in the Samanid Empire. At a time when classical Islamic civilization was beginning to show signs of decline, the Persian Renaissance brought new developments and laid the foundation for the Islamic Golden Age. But that's not all. The Persian Renaissance had one more product, a period often referred to as the Shia Century. You see, in earlier Islamic centuries, Persia was predominantly Sunni. The Persians were instrumental in developing classical Sunni learning. But Shia also found a place in Persia from the very beginning. After Ali's death, many members of Ali's family and the Prophet's household took refuge in Persia, first from the Umayyad and later Abbasid persecution. The Persians took them in and treated them with respect. This shared experience of oppression fostered strong connection between the Persian people and Shia Islam. As a result, the balance of power between the two branches of Islam shifted during the Persian Renaissance, as the Sunni Abbasids gradually lost control of the Caliphate and Shia Islam rose to prominence. From the Buyids in Persia and the Hamdanids in Syria to the Fatimids in North Africa, Shia regimes held power in the heart of the Islamic world for over a century, from 945 to 1055 AD. If things continued that way for just another century, there was a likelihood that Shia Islam would overtake Sunni Islam and become the largest branch of Islam in the world. But that was not to be, because in 1055, the Shia century was terminated by some Sunni Turks. They overthrew the Shia regime in the Abbasid capital Baghdad and reinstated Sunni Islam. But this intervention by the Turks raises some interesting questions. How did the Turks get involved in the Shia-Sunni rivalry? And more importantly, how did the Turks become Muslims in the first place? The Arabs' first contacts with the Turks were purely military clashes. The Arabs were impressed by these nomads and hired them to fight their wars. In this process, some Turkic mercenaries embraced Islam, marking the first wave of Turkic Islamization. At this stage, Islam played only a tiny role in the religious lives of the Turks, as the majority still practiced shamanism or Buddhism. The Arabs wanted to use these Turkic soldiers, but at the same time, they also knew that these mercenaries could not be trusted. Loyalty isn't something that can be bought. You must take time to foster it. But thankfully, for the Arabs of the 8th century, there was indeed a way to foster loyalty. And it was perhaps the oldest practice invented by mankind that is unfortunately still with us today: slavery. Throughout history, slavery has taken many shapes and forms. There is slavery for hard labor, there is sexual slavery, and there is an ancient tradition of enslaving young boys to fight future wars. In this part of the world, at that particular time, these boys were either captured or bought from Turkic tribes at a very young age, converted to Islam, and sent to special schools to learn the art of killing. The training these boys endured was unspeakably brutal and often deadly, stripping them of their humanity. Those who survived years of training emerged as hardened killing machines. They would then be sold to various buyers with whom they would form a unique bond of loyalty. The most elite of the slave soldiers were known as Mamluks, famous for their exceptional combat skills and unwavering devotion to their masters. They were so loyal that many buyers trusted them more than their own families. Starting in the 9th century, the Abbasids began recruiting them into their armies. As a result, large numbers of Turkic boys were brought into the Islamic world, converted, trained, and sold to different parts of the Caliphate, where they fought and died in the service of their masters. But you see, occasionally, their masters died untimely. And occasionally, these slave soldiers revolted. And when that happened, there wasn't a whole lot you could do. These were not ordinary slaves. These were professional soldiers who spent their entire lives training and killing. So when they are loosed, someone is going to lose. How could anyone compete with them? As a result, these slave soldiers, the Mamluks, established powerful dynasties that shaped medieval Islamic history. Once in power, these former slaves all became ardent builders and defenders of Islam. This practice of trading and training the Turkic boys continued for centuries, leading to the second wave of Turkic Islamization. The third wave, unlike the previous two, was initiated by two Turkic tribes living on the fringes of the Samanid Empire, the Karluks and the Oghuz. In 840, the Karluk Turks founded the Karakhani Khanate. At about the same time, the Samanids introduced Sunni Islam to the Karakhani Khanate, and the local population began firmly accepting Islam in large numbers. The pivotal moment arrived in 934 when the Karakhani prince Selçuk Bukhara Khan became the first Turkic Khan to embrace Sunni Islam. Some say he was converted in Attush by a Samanid merchant. Some say he was converted in Attush by an exiled Samanid prince. Some say the merchant and the prince were in fact the same person, Nasir I, the brother of Ismail Samani. Regardless of the specific circumstances, his conversion took place in Attush under Samanid influence. At the time, Selçuk's uncle was the Khan of the Karakhanids. Selçuk, eager to seize power from his uncle, turned to Islam for support. In 934, he launched a holy war against his uncle and received a lot of support from the Islamic world. His successful rebellion brought him to the throne of the Karakhani Khanate. Once in power, Selçuk actively promoted Islam among the Turks. The Karakhanids, boasted by their newfound Islamic identity, waged war against non-Muslim populations. Arab and Persian soldiers from as far away as Iraq, joined the Karakhani cause and fought its holy wars. In 1006, the kingdom of Khotan, the last Buddhist stronghold in the Tarim Basin, collapsed. Satuk passed away around 956 and is buried in Attush. His mausoleum still stands in Attush and remains the most sacred pilgrimage site in the Tarim Basin. If you ever find yourself in southern Xinjiang, I highly recommend you to stop by and take a look. The Oghuz Turks had a different story. In the 960s, the declining Samanid Empire lost all its southern territories to a Mamluk commander whose descendants established the Ghaznavid Empire in 977. Facing attacks from the Karakhanis in the north and the Ghaznavids in the south, the Samanids hired Oghuz Turks to fight their wars. Around 985, the Oghuz Turks embraced Sunni Islam and rose to prominence as mercenaries for the Samanids. However, despite their efforts, the Samanid Empire collapsed in 999. The Karakhanis and the Ghaznavids, recognizing the Oghuz Turks as a potential threat, expelled them from their territories. The displaced Oghuz tribes migrated westward and were joined by more and more tribes. In 1037, they established the Seljuk Empire and quickly became the most powerful Turkic force in medieval times. By 1040, Persia had fallen into their hands. In 1055, they reached the heart of the Islamic world, Baghdad. There, the Seljuks altered the course of history. At that time, Baghdad, the center of Sunnism, was controlled by the Shia Buyids. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, a symbolic leader of Sunni Islam, was reduced to a mere figurehead. The people of Baghdad were angered and sought the help of the Seljuks. The Seljuks answered the call, defeated the Shia Buyids, captured Baghdad, and restored Sunni dominance. Had the Seljuks not intervened, the Shia Century could have continued. Baghdad could have become a Shia majority city, and there was a likelihood that Shia Islam might have become the biggest branch of Islam. But the Seljuks' impact went beyond restoring Sunni dominance. After capturing Baghdad, the Seljuks expanded westward into Anatolia, beginning the Turkification and Islamization of the region and laying the foundation for modern-day Turkey. During the rule of the Ghaznavids, the Karakhanids, and the Seljuks, the steady arrival of the Turkic nomads continued for 3 centuries and forever changed the demographics and environment of the lands stretching from the Tarim Basin to Anatolia. These newcomers settled in cities, assimilated into the native Persian culture, and also adopted Islam. But you see, the conversion of these common Turks differed from that of the Turkic military elite and khans. The latter group embraced Islam mostly for strategic reasons, gaining legitimacy, boosting morale, and securing support from the Islamic world. Their conversion was driven by tangible benefits such as territorial expansion and resource acquisition. In contrast, most Turks, the commoners, had no such incentives. They had no wars to fight and no lands to conquer. They had sheep, horses, and cattle to raise. Yet, today, over 90% of the Turkic population, more than 150 million people, identifies as Muslims. So somewhere down the line, at some point in Turkic history, a huge wave of conversion to Islam must have occurred. To understand how the Turkic masses embraced Islam, you've got to start with a journey to a city in southern Kazakhstan. My adventure began with a night train from Almaty, which took me to the ancient city of Shymkent. There, I wrote some scripts, poked around in the bazaars, visited a few ancient Sogdian ruins, and had plenty of naan, kebab, pulav, ice cream, and tomatoes. After 2 well-rested nights in Shymkent, I felt ready for the real adventure, packed my bag, and found a ride bound for the city of Turkestan. And why Turkestan, you ask? Well, that is why.
You know,
Come to think of it, this project is about the seven sons. So it goes without saying that Islam will be discussed in great detail at some point. And I think we've just arrived at one of those points. Welcome, viewers, to the most secret site in Central Asia, the Jerusalem of Central Asia, the mausoleum of Hoja Ahmed Yasawi, the holiest man in the Turkic-speaking world. We will get to his story shortly, but let me first discuss an even more important topic. How did Islam arrive and thrive in this part of the world? If you ever go visit the Seven Stuns, Western China or India, you will likely find yourself visiting many mausoleums, often teeming with pilgrims. Around those mausoleums, you will always find huge mosques and hundreds if not thousands of tombs of the local people. You may wonder who the mausoleums were built for, and why they are such a big deal. Let me tell one thing about these mausoleums. The ones built underneath them were no ordinary people. They were saints who played a crucial role in Islamizing the region. In this part of the world, these saints are known as Sufis, and it was these Sufis who brought Islam to the hearts and minds of the Turks, leading to the fourth, last, and the largest wave of Turkic Islamization. You see, back then, the Turkic society was nomadic, and most Turks followed shamanism. They believed certain individuals could travel between the material and spiritual worlds, and Orthodox Islam had difficulty making sense to them. So clearly, a different approach was needed to convert the Turks, maybe less orthodox, less strict, more inclusive, more fluid, and better suited to the needs of the Turks. And guess what? Islam does have a very unique branch that meets all these requirements: Sufism. And that led us to our next question. What exactly is Sufism? Sufism is a collective term for various Islamic organizations that gives deeper meaning to Islam while practicing spiritual exercises. It is not a political faction, it is not a religious faction, but a spiritual path within Islam. Instead of strictly following religious laws, it seeks direct personal experience of Allah. Sufism originated in late 7th century Iraq. It started with Muslims who wanted to be more like the Prophet Muhammad and his early followers. To achieve that, they lived simple lives, focusing on spiritual practices and traveling to spread their teachings. From the mid-8th century, the translation movement exposed Islam to philosophical ideas from ancient Greece, India, and Persia. Over time, Sufis incorporated many foreign doctrines and practices into their beliefs. They adopted the Neoplatonic concept of a transcendent one, the Gnostic pursuit of spiritual liberation through secret knowledge, the Manichaean dualistic worldview, the Buddhist notion of nirvana, and the shamanistic belief in spiritual intermediaries. These external influences shaped Sufi beliefs about the nature of Allah, the human soul, and the path to spiritual enlightenment, leading to a diverse and syncretic body of Sufi thought. From the late 10th century onward, Sufism rapidly spread across North Africa, Persia, Central Asia, and South Asia. For people on the fringes of the Islamic world, such as the Turks, Sufism proved far more appealing than Orthodox Islam. Sufis effectively filled the role of shamans and became the agents of Islamization. By adapting shamanistic practices like singing, dancing, and chanting, they made Islam more accessible to local populations. Generations of Sufi efforts birthed a new form of Islam, one deeply intertwined with Turkic culture. Over time, this Turkic Islam became a marker of both community and identity. And that was when the truly massive conversion began. In this process, the Sufis were saintized and were seen as intermediaries between their followers and Allah. This led to the formation of a unique social network with intense loyalty. After their passing, the mausoleums of the Sufis became important spiritual centers and pilgrimage sites. People come here for guidance and bury their loved ones near them. Most of the shrines in Central Asia are devoted to one Sufi master or another. And the greatest Sufi master in this part of the world was Khoja Ahmed Yasawi. Without his efforts in spreading Islam, the Turkic-speaking world might be a different place today. Yasawi was born in Syrian and trained as a Sufi in Bukhara. He spent most of his life here in Turkestan and passed away here in approximately 1166. He founded the Yasawi Sufi order and wonderfully explained his understanding of Islam to ordinary people through poetry and sermons in their own language. This led to his immense popularity and respect, as well as the rapid Islamization of this entire region. His mausoleum is Kazakhstan's greatest architectural monument and most important pilgrimage site. It is also one of the best places to get a sense of Central Asian Sufism. The locals back then even had a saying that perfectly captured their reverence: Medina de Muhammad, Turkestan de Ahmed, meaning there was a Muhammad in Medina and there was an Ahmed in Turkestan. For Orthodox Islam, such a comparison to the Prophet might have been unthinkable, even audacious. But here, in the realm of the Turks and Sufis, blending spiritual reverence with local identity was not just accepted, it was a common practice. It is said that when Ahmed Yasawi turned 63, believing his life should not surpass that of the Prophet, he moved into an underground chamber where he lived until his death. After his passing, his students spread the Yasawi order to Transoxiana, Khwarezm, the Volga River Basin, Persia, and later to Anatolia. We will come back to the topic of Sufism many times in this series. It is, after all, one of the most complicated and controversial topics in human civilization, religiously, historically, and politically. I'm afraid we have just covered the surface, so yeah, get ready for a comeback. With the combined efforts of the Persians and Turks, the Islamic Golden Age arrived. During this era, scholars and artists made remarkable contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and literature. Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic world, became a global center of learning and prosperity. Well, this was all about to change. The mid-12th century witnessed the rise of two new powers in Central Asia, the Khitans and the Khwarezmians. The Khitans, driven out of Manchuria by the Jurchens, established the Karakitan Khanate in 1124. Meanwhile, the Khwarezmians, a regional power founded by the Mamluks, seized the opportunity to expand their territory. Within a mere 28 years, they transformed their small kingdom into a vast empire. By 1218, the Khwarezmian Empire had become the most powerful state in the Muslim world. That same year, 1218, the Karakitan Khanate collapsed. For decades, it had been weakened by rebellions and internal wars. The rising Khwarezmian Empire also put a lot of pressure on them from the west. The decisive blow, however, came from the east. Another nomadic force rose in the Mongolian plateau. Of all the powerful nomads emerged from this plateau, this one would prove the most devastating. The Islamic Golden Age was to be ended, and the Khwarezmian Empire was going to bleed very, very badly. After wrapping up filming in Turkestan, the next challenge was figuring out how to get to a nearby ghost town. The place is so obscure that most Kazakhstanis have probably never even heard of it. There is no public transportation to get there. It's the kind of journey where Google Maps shrugs its shoulders and wishes you luck. But if you're ever in the area, trust me, it's worth every bit of the effort. My adventure began with my hostel host dropping me off at the central bazaar. The challenge was real. Nobody spoke English, translation apps were hopeless, and everything felt overwhelmingly confusing. But my determination was stronger. After rounds of asking with my rusty Russian, I finally secured a ride at the third taxi station. Yes, there are 3 of them, all for the princely sum of 1,000 tenge. For context, that's not even enough to buy a cup of coffee in most cities. But here is your ticket to an unforgettable journey.
Good morning, viewers. What lies behind me is unlike anything I've ever shown you before. Behind these walls is one of the most significant sites on Earth, the ruins of Ottawa. At one point, this one city alone single-handedly changed the history of Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Because this city was the very city that brought Genghis Khan and his ruthless Mongol army into this part of the world. It is believed that much of Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe might have been spared from Mongol carnage if the governor of this city had not killed Genghis Khan's 450 merchant envoys in the winter of 1218. And to better understand that history, we kind of have to go back to the late 1210s. At that time, Genghis was fighting battle after battle in North China against the Jurchens and had to deal with the rebellion in Siberia. He was not interested in making new enemies in Central Asia. On the contrary, he was eagerly looking for new trading partners and potential alliances. And this was where Ottawa came in. Because you see, Ottawa Oasis is situated in a rather unique location. It was near the confluence of 2 big rivers, had a great irrigation system, and had been a sedentary civilization since the 2nd century BC. For over 1,000 years, Ottawa had been the buffer zone between the nomadic steppe to the north and sedentary cultures to the south. As a matter of fact, it still sits on the border of modern-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So, naturally, in the winter of 1218, Genghis sent a large caravan of Mongol merchants here to discuss potential partnerships, alliances, trade, and so on. Many Mongol nobles also sent their representatives on that trip, bringing a lot of expensive goods and gifts such as gold, silver, sable furs, and of course, silk. But apparently, the talk didn't go well. The governor of Ottawa accused them of being spies, seized the caravan's goods, and slaughtered all 450 merchant envoys, leaving only 1 camel man to bring the message to Genghis Khan. However, the charge of espionage was not entirely untrue because both the Khwarezmians and the Mongols were known to use their diplomats and merchants to gather key information and spread rumors and propaganda. However, killing them all was certainly taboo. In the olden days, to carry out such a horrific diplomatic action, the governor must have some kind of permission from the king. So clearly, the king of the Khwarezmian Empire was involved in this killing. Genghis was livid when he heard about this, but still didn't want to go to war over this. So he sent a delegation of 3 diplomats to the king of the Khwarezmian Empire, demanding the governor of Ottawa be punished for his deeds. The king, however, instead of punishing the governor, beheaded one of the diplomats and shaved off the beards of the other 2. When Genghis heard about this, he left his general Mukadi in North China to continue the war against the Jurchens. He gathered a large army in the Altan Mountains himself and launched a full-scale invasion of Khwarezmia. The execution of the merchants and the humiliation of his 3 ambassadors greatly offended the Mongols in 2 ways. First, envoys of any kind were considered inviolate in Mongol law, and any slight done to them demanded reparations or vengeance. Secondly, the deaths of the merchants opened economic warfare. The steppe nomads had always been greatly concerned with the security of trade routes. As Khwarezmians controlled all the routes beyond Odra, the Mongols were now completely cut off from trading partners in the Near East. No one knows exactly how many soldiers were gathered, but according to some historians, Chinggis sent about 200,000 troops, the largest Mongol army ever. And the rest is history. Odra put up a determined fight. It was extensively garrisoned, fortified, and resisted the Mongols for 5 months. In total, the Mongols launched 13 attacks and finally sacked it in February 1220, when the leading general of the city deserted and opened the gate.
So according to the written records, that gate right there is where the Mongol army came in. Well, look, it says here, it was through this gate that the army of Chinggis Khan entered the city. Right here. That's how it happened.
As a result, Odra became the first of many cities to have its entire population butchered or enslaved before it was razed to the ground. In fact, as I'm talking about this, Odra just rained a little. Who knows? Perhaps the ghosts of Odra are crying now. The governor of Odra was captured alive and was executed in a rather unique way. The legend goes, the Mongols poured molten silver into his orifices, burned and smothered him to death. If you are a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, this should ring a bell. The seizure of Odra left the Khwarezmian heartland wide open to conquest, which would eventually lead to a bloodbath that made the massacres in East Asia pale in comparison.
The Mongol army was divided into 3 forces. Jyoti's group invaded the Fergana Valley via the Tian Shan Mountains. Tagli and Ogd's force conquered Odra through the Jungarian Gate, while Chinggis Khan and Toluid led the main army across the Kizilkum to invade Transoxiana. Within the same months Odra fell, Chinggis Khan sacked Bukhara. It was built in the 12th century. Yeah. The legend goes, when Chinggis got here, he was so impressed by this minaret that decided to not destroy it. After the fall of Bukhara, Samarkand fell within a month. Then, a critical issue came up. You see, by the time Samarkand fell, Chinggis was turning 58 years old. As someone who always found himself in the war, the important question of succession was to be brought up. Throughout his life, Chinggis probably fathered hundreds of sons, but only 4 with his queen, Bort. Only her sons were considered his legitimate heirs. The eldest, Jochi, was followed by Takade, Ogade, and Tolui. While the parentage of the three younger sons was undisputed, Jochi's lineage was shrouded in doubt. You see, in the early days of the Chinggis' rise to power, his bride was captured and raped by his enemies. After Chinggis rescued his bride, she gave birth to Jochi about 9 months later. 9 months is a very tricky time. Chinggis was either very on time or he was not on time at all, if you know what I'm saying. While Chinggis acknowledged Jochi as his son, questions always existed about Jochi's true parentage. Takade, for example, never recognized Jochi as a true brother and called him a bastard. After Samarkand was captured, Chinggis sent Tolui to raid the south while regrouping his 3 elder sons outside Urgench, the Khwarezmian capital. It was during the siege of Urgench that the sibling rivalry came to a head. Urgench was unlike any other Silk Road city. It was in the marshy delta. The soft ground was unsuitable for traditional siege warfare, and there were no large stones for the catapults. To further complicate matters, Chinggis gave Jochi the command of the operation and promised the city to Jochi as his prize. Knowing full well what would happen if the Urgench people put up a fight, Jochi decided to talk the city into surrender to avoid complete destruction. However, these negotiations delayed the already difficult siege and angered Takade, who was eager to raise the city and move on. The two quarreled and quarreled. In the end, Chinggis had to intervene and appointed Ogade as the commander. Ultimately, Urgench was captured only after a fierce and costly battle. It was the most difficult battle of the Chinggis campaign in Central Asia. Ogade ruthlessly destroyed the city and massacred its inhabitants. Jochi was disappointed and withdrew from future Mongol campaigns. He retreated to his territories north of the Aral and Caspian Seas, never to reunite with his father or brothers. Disappointed with the conduct of Jochi and Takade, Chinggis Khan named Ogade as his successor in 1223. However, this decision ignited further conflict, this time between Ogade and Tolui. Tolui was indeed less active than his brothers during their father's early conquests, but once he reached adulthood, he was the finest warrior of the 4 and the most brutal. And it was also during this expedition to Khwarezmia that Tolui truly rose to fame. While Chinggis and his elder sons were stuck in Urgench, Tolui led a smaller army of 50,000 men south. Tolui was unopposed, not only because of his army management, but also because his campaigns were notorious for their abnormal brutality. Unlike his father and brothers, who often spared artisans and enslaved women and children after taking the city, Tolui's conquests were marked by total devastation. When Tolui took a city, he would put quite literally everything that moved to death. Men, women, young and old, even cats and dogs. As the city was being massacred, Tolui would send smaller armies to scour the countryside, ensuring total annihilation. He was the personification of death itself, and his campaigns were just a relentless succession of massacres, leaving no survivors. Merv, Tus, Nishapur, Herat, Bamiyan, Bach, and Turmet were all destroyed and lost much, if not all, of their population. By the end of 1221, the Khwarezmian Empire, which had just reached its largest territorial extent 3 years ago, lay in ruins. Anyway, Tolui was also hoping to become the next Khan. With Jochi and Takade sidelined, Tolui's position seemed strengthened. He was unquestionably superior to Ogade in military terms. Moreover, Mongol tradition often favored the youngest son as the heir. But Chinggis ignored all this and passed Tolui over in favor of Ogade. 4 years later, in 1227, Chinggis died, and just 5 years later, Tolui also died. The record shows that Tolui died during a shamanistic ritual while saving Ogade from a curse. Shamanistic ritual or not, it's clear that Tolui's death was linked to Ogade. Toluid's ending was mysterious and unfortunate as he lost both his throne and his life to Ogde. However, Toluid had one edge that none of his brothers had, and the entire Ogde family was to feel the pain very soon. Toluid's edge was the extraordinary woman he married, who bore him 4 sons as fierce as he was. 19 years after Toluid's death, this woman led her sons back to the center of power and avenged Toluid by eradicating nearly every member of the Ogde family, sparing only the very young and very loyal. Her name was Solhotenboch, aka the mother of 4 Huns. How she let her boys retake power, how she allied with the Jochi family, and how she destroyed her enemies deserve to be made into a TV series. It really is better than most novels. Anyway, after Toluid's eldest son Monk became the 4th Han in 1251, he divided responsibilities among his brothers. His youngest brother, Alikboch, was stationed in Karakorum. Kublai was tasked with conquering North China, and Huluk was assigned the mission of conquering the Muslim states. In 1253, Huluk marched out with 1/5 of the empire's fighting men, reached Transoxiana in 1255, and resumed the bloody conquest started by his father 3 decades earlier. By 1258, his forces reached Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world. Like father, like son, Huluk razed the city to the ground, burned all its libraries, and put everything that moved to death. The Abbasid Caliph himself was wrapped in a rug and trampled to death by horses. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The center of the Islamic world was then shifted to Cairo, which was guarded by the only people that could defeat the Mongols: the Turkic slave soldiers, the Mamluks. The 2 Mamluk sultanates, one in Egypt and one in India, halted the Mongol advances into Africa and South Asia. They held their lines, pushed back the Mongol assaults repeatedly, and were the last defenders of Islam. So it turned out at the end of the day, Islam was not saved by the Sunni caliphs, not by the Shia imams, not by the Ismaili assassins, not by the Sufi masters, not by its talented scientists and engineers, but by those low-born, purchased Turkic slaves who were trained to kill. At the 11th hour, they stood up, refused to surrender, defended the frontiers of the abode of Islam, and saved the Muslim faith. Had they not risen to the challenge, history would have unfolded differently. Well, that gives a lot to think about, doesn't it? The nature of power, the role of religion, the fragility of civilization, and the law of the jungle. Two years after the fall of Baghdad, in 1259, the 4th Han Monk died. Immediately, a civil war broke out between his 2 brothers, Alikboch and Kublai. In April 1260, in the absence of his brothers, Alikboch was elected Han by the Mongol nobles in Karakorum. However, just a month later in May, Kublai proclaimed himself Han in Shund, backed by the powerful Mongol princes and military leaders in southern Manchuria and North China. This civil war between Karakorum and Shund lasted 4 years and shattered the unity of the Mongol Empire. After defeating his brother, Kublai ascended to the throne and became the 5th Han. However, his victory weakened the empire and irrevocably fractured it. The vast Mongol Empire was now divided among the 4 khanates: the Golden Horde, led by the Jochi family; the Tagadeh Khanate, led by the Tagadeh family; the Ir Khanate and the Yuan Empire, both led by the Toluid family. Over the next 100 years, the 4 brother nations engaged in a series of conflicts. The Golden Horde fought 9 wars with the Ir Khanate and 3 with the Tagadeh Khanate. The Ir Khanate and the Tagadeh Khanate clashed 5 times, while the Tagadeh Khanate and the Yuan Empire fought 3 wars. Ironically, despite the Mongols' destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate and the massacre of Baghdad, 3 of the 4 Mongol Khanates eventually embraced Islam. The Ur Khanate in Persia adopted Islam as the state religion in 1295. The Golden Horde under Uzbek Khan fully embraced Islam in 1315. Uzbek was the longest reigning Khan of the Golden Horde and was a popular ruler. His followers even adopted his name as a title of respect. And yes, he is also part of the reason why Uzbekistan is called Uzbekistan, not Uzbekistan, Uzbekistan. The Turkic Khanate in Central Asia followed suit and adopted Islam as the state religion in the early 1340s. Even the Yuan Empire in China, which was nominally Tibetan Buddhist, experienced significant Islamization. Muslim officials gained prominence, Islamic culture thrived, and there was a substantial influx of Muslim migrants from Central and West Asia. Most of the Hui Muslim community in modern-day China can trace its origins to this period of Yuan rule. The Islamization of the Mongols was followed by the fall of the Khanates. In 1335, the Black Death devastated the Ur Khanate and wiped out the last Ur Khan and all his sons. In 1368, the Chinese overthrew the Yuan Empire, forcing the Mongols back to the Mongolian plateau. Meanwhile, from 1359 to 1381, the Golden Horde went through 2 decades of near anarchy. During this time, a series of short-reigning Khans deposed and killed each other, only to suffer the same fate next. The Turkic Khanate, however, faced the most dramatic decline. Around 1346, it split into the Western and Eastern Turkic Khanates. While the Eastern Turkic Khanate under Toluid Khan stabilized and gained strength, the Western Turkic Khanate descended into chaos. By 1358, tribal leaders had seized control, reducing the Western Turkic princes to mere figureheads. In 1360, Toluid seized an opportunity to invade the Western Turkic Khanate. The local tribal leaders were no match for his forces and sent a negotiator. But instead of negotiating, that guy jumped ship and joined Toluid. Together they conquered the Western Turkic Khanate. Thrilled by the reunification of the Khanate, Toluid rewarded this defector with Transoxiana. Over the next 3 years, Toluid successfully restored the Turkic Khanate and expanded its territory into Afghanistan. He passed away in 1363 and was buried in Armalik, the capital of the Eastern Turkic Khanate. His mausoleum is still there, just 14 kilometers from the China-Kazakhstan border. After Toluid died, that defector in Transoxiana raised a large army and rebelled. Within 7 years, he captured Samarkand and Bakh, pushing the Turkic forces eastward. In 1370, he founded his own empire and began a series of bloody conquests rivaled only by Chinggis Khan. Speaking of Chinggis, it's important to note that his generals were instrumental in his conquests, and Chinggis was lucky to have some of the most exceptional generals of his time. 4 of his most brilliant commanders were known as Durbin-Nohes, the 4 Huns. They were Julum, Subodeh, Jib,
And we have the last Hun, Kublai, who was responsible for conquering the Cardinals. And this guy was from a very unique Mongol tribe called Baralus. When the Khwarezmian Empire was conquered, the Baralus Mongols, along with many other Mongol tribes, migrated to Central Asia and Persia. Many of them controlled the region of Kish. Unlike other newly arrived Mongol tribes, which remained nomadic, the Baralus Mongols became sedentary. And because of their sedentary lifestyle, the Baralus started to have extensive contact with the local population. Within just a few decades, the Baralus Mongols adopted Islam and were Turkified. About 105 years after the collapse of the Khwarezmian Empire, in the spring of 1336, a boy was born into this tribe in Kish, which is about 80 kilometers that way. This is Samarkand, by the way. I didn't go to Kish because the round trip takes about 6 hours and I'm just too tired. In his early years, he raided the travelers and stole livestock. One day when he was 27 years old, he tried to steal sheep from someone else and was shot by 2 arrows, one in his right leg and another in his right hand. Both injuries disabled him for life and eventually gave rise to his nickname, the Lame. However, that young man had a future that had nothing to do with lame, because he would be known for many things. A great patron of art and architecture, the last nomadic conqueror of the Eurasian steppe, one of the most influential rulers in the Muslim world, a cold-blooded butcher, the great-great-great-grandfather of Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, and the founder of Timurid Empire. His name was Timur the Lame, or Timur-Lame.
After founding his empire in 1370, Timur made Samarkand his capital and spent the next 35 years conquering neighboring lands, many of which had barely recovered from the Mongol carnage 150 years ago, and they were to be destroyed again. In 1377, Timur ended the 20-year anarchy of the Golden Horde and placed an exiled Golden Horde prince on the throne. In 1375, 1376, and 1383, he defeated the Eastern Turkic Khanate thrice. After neutralizing the Eastern Turkic Khanate and the Golden Horde, Timur immediately turned his attention to Persia. From 1383 to 1386, Timur captured Herat, Isfizar, Sistan, Zoranj, Tehran, Sultaniye, Meragah, and Tabriz. Many of them were reduced to rubble and lost most, if not all, of their population. The lucky captives were beheaded right away. The not-so-lucky ones were dismembered and tortured to death. And the very unlucky ones were cemented into the walls alive. But while he was pillaging Persia, the Golden Horde betrayed him and captured Tabriz. Timur then paused his campaigns in Persia and spent the next 9 years fighting the Golden Horde, destroying Tabriz, Shirvan, Majar, Azak, Sarai, Ukik, and Astrakhan. The destruction was so complete that the Golden Horde never recovered. In the meantime, Timur resumed his conquest of Persia. Between 1387 and 1393, he captured Isfahan, Shiraz, Georgia, and Baghdad. As usual, the conquests were followed by massacres, sparing only the skilled artisans and the scholars. And between those major campaigns, Timur didn't forget to further subjugate the Eastern Turkic Khanate. He launched 2 more attacks from 1389 to 1390. The Eastern Turkic Khan was driven into the Gobi and disappeared, and the new Khan was forced to make peace with Timur in 1397. After this, the tireless conqueror set his sights on India. On September 30, 1398, Timur led a massive army of 90,000 across the Indus River. Tulumba, Multan, and Batna fell one by one. And on December 17th, Timur laid siege to Delhi. Before the battle, he ordered the execution of 100,000 captives, fearing a revolt. Delhi, one of the wealthiest cities in the world, was devastated, with its population first enslaved and then massacred. 1 year later, in 1399, the war with the Ottomans began. The 2 most powerful rulers in the Turkic world absolutely hated each other. In 1400, Timur invaded Armenia and Georgia and sacked Chivas. Then he invaded Syria, sacking Aleppo and Damascus. In June 1401, Timur sacked Baghdad again, killing 20,000 of his citizens. A year later, on July 20th, 1402, the Ottomans were defeated. The Ottoman Sultan was captured and later died in captivity. In the winter of that year, Timur's campaign reached the western edge of Anatolia, sacking Smyrna and killing nearly all its Christian population. 2 years later, in the winter of 1404, Timur started a military campaign against the Ming Empire of China. With everything in place, Timur embarked on his final expedition and made a fateful stop at Otra.
Many years later, during Timur's reign, Attara was rebuilt and revived. In February 1405, almost exactly 185 years after Chinggis destroyed this place, Timur turned 68 years old. He came here to gather an army to go to war with the Chinese Ming Empire. But before his campaign even got started, he caught a cold and died here. And this mausoleum behind me was where Emir Timur and two of his grandsons, including Ulugh, were buried. Yep, that is his mausoleum. One of the most important rulers in the Muslim world was buried here.
By the time of his death, Timur had built a vast empire. While Central Asia flourished under his rule, other regions suffered immeasurable losses. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, Delhi, and countless others across the Arab, Georgian, Persian, Turkic, and Indian worlds were razed to the ground, their populations massacred. Timur and his descendants were ardent patrons of Persian culture, so much so that Central Asia once became the center of Persian civilization. Under their rule, Persian became the primary language of administration and literature. Samarkand and Bukhara flourished, becoming two of the world's most beautiful cities. In addition to Persian, a literary form of Taghlit Turkic was promoted as a cultural and official language, which would later evolve into modern Uzbek and Uyghur languages. Timur was a devout Muslim and often justified his conquests by referring to himself as the sword of Islam. He was a generous patron of Islamic institutions and Sufism. Many Sufi orders, including the most influential Sufi order in the world, Naqshbandi, were established during his reign. He also undertook the restoration of the mausoleum of the Grand Sufi Ahmed Yasawi.
This mausoleum, however, wasn't his first mausoleum. It was the second one, built in 1389 by another extremely important figure in history, Timur. Legend has it that one night Timur had a dream in which he saw Yasawi. In the dream, Yasawi predicted Timur's victory in the upcoming war. Taking this as a sign, Timur went on a campaign that would indeed be successful. After the victory, Timur came over here, paid a visit to Yasawi's mausoleum, and decided to build a much bigger mausoleum for him to thank him. The real reason, however, was more like Timur was trying to legitimize his rule. When he took this land, to appease the local population, he decided to build a much bigger mausoleum to house the remains of the holy man, intending to glorify Islam, of course, and more importantly, gain support from the local population. Construction began in 1389. Timur imported builders from all over the nation, mosaic workers from Shiraz, and stonemasons from Isfahan. The result of their combined efforts is a structure of beauty unlike any other.
However, the construction was halted in 1405 when Timur died, with the front facade still unfinished. And you can actually still see the scaffolding poles protruding. Despite being incomplete, this mausoleum behind me is one of the best preserved Timurid constructions and marks the beginning of Timurid architectural style. And it is still the spiritual home for tens of millions of people. The Timurid Empire was a shooting star in the night sky. It was bright, but fleeting. With its decline came new players and legends who would lay the foundation of the seven stuns.